Are rollups the next big unlock to extend the use of Bitcoin? An increasing number of teams are saying just that. And Edan Yago and the team behind Bitcoin OS just dropped a white paper with a couple big new things. But first, what's up, y'all? Welcome back to the Built on Bitcoin podcast, where we're talking to the best founders in Bitcoin. I'm your host, Jacob Brown, and you know what we do here? We're talking to all the cool people building the latest stuff, trying to extend the use of BTC the asset or Bitcoin the network. And today, I have Edan Yago back for a second time on the podcast because last week they dropped a white paper for something called BitSNARK and Grail. And so I wanted to get his take on what these things are. I keep hearing about rollups. I kind of get them, but not really. I need to spend more time digging in the weeds. I haven't spent enough time in ETH to know what these things are. We go over that. We go over what the white paper is. What is Bitcoin OS, which is kind of their framework for an interoperable system of rollups focused on Bitcoin. This thing called BitSNARK, which is inspired by BitVM, and Grail Bridge, which is it's a one use of BitSNARK focused on a practical and easy to use bridge that interacts with Bitcoin L1 and a rollup. In this episode, we definitely cover those three things of what is Bitcoin OS, what is BitSNARK, and Grail Bridge from this white paper, and how do they all intersect. I also wanted to get his take on the halving and the runes launch and a bunch of other topics. So, without further ado, let me introduce this excellent episode with Edan Yago, core contributor at Sovryn and Bitcoin OS.
Welcome to Built on Bitcoin.
All right, Yago, welcome back. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm good. This one's gonna be fun. I think you're in the elite pantheon of second time guests on the podcast. Might be like the third guest to be in that one out of 150 episodes. So, first of all, congrats on that. Good to see you again.
Well, thanks for having me back. After the first time, I thought I would never be back.
uh, no, man, these are, I love these episodes. So, yeah, ton to talk about. You just dropped something like 3 hours ago. So we're definitely going to discuss this. But I want to get some like quick topics on the halving and runes and on kind of Sovryn going multi-chain. And then we can jump into like the meat and potatoes of this episode. So first, you've been around a while, you've been through some halvings. What was your pulse on seeing this halving and like runes launching and all that craziness?
Well, I think this is the most important halving since the first one. I think the biggest question. All right, so I'm going to talk not from a Bitcoiner's perspective, but from a crypto overview, right? I think the most important question in crypto is when does crypto do the same thing that every single other industry has ever done in the history of mankind, which is starts out with fragmentation, lots of, somebody invents something and then a million versions of it are created. And then at some point there's a maturation phase and you move from fragmentation to consolidation. And this is doubly true in spaces where you have network effects. And nothing has more network effects than Bitcoin and crypto, right? You've got the network effect of money, you've got the network effect of liquidity, you've got the network effect of the actual blockchain network, you've got the network effect of security. So the big question for anyone who's in crypto, right? Not in Bitcoin, but in crypto, is when does the consolidation start? Because when the consolidation starts, the type of party that they need to be at changes dramatically, right? You need to start being at the party of, you need to start going to where the consolidation is going to happen. In my mind, that is obviously going to be Bitcoin. So I think there are a number of factors to look at, but the biggest one is when does Bitcoin break out of its self-imposed limitations, right? Those were the limitations that were limiting Bitcoin's ability to fully utilize its massive network effect advantage. And the reason I think this halving is so important is because this is the halving where Bitcoin is breaking out of those limitations and is going to be able to fully express its absolute network advantage. And as a result, this is the watershed halving where the consolidation begins.
Is most of that coming from Bitcoin being viewed as having more expansive use cases now? You know, we have quasi-fungible token standards, we have ordinals, which are quasi-NFTs. So most things are coming back to the mother chain, and the meme of Bitcoin as the forever chain and the best money is underlying all of that. Do you think those are the big drivers, or is it something else?
Well, specifically, I think from a technical perspective, the big driver is Taproot, right? So in 2021, we got Taproot, a lot of sort of hype up until the Taproot soft fork, and then crickets. Nothing happened. Everyone was like, oh, Taproot's a failure, didn't do anything, devs aren't using it, blah, 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 blah. Which was true only momentarily, because the thing about Taproot is it was a complex piece of technology, and it took developers a while to figure out how to use it. But then, 2 years later, beginning of 2023, you get Casey introduces NFTs on Bitcoin, ordinals. And Bitcoin is like, so that happened in December, right? But a few months later, March, April of 2023, that market woke up. And Bitcoin just became the most valuable NFT market in the world overnight without breaking a sweat. That is the power of network effects. Then Domo introduced BRC20s. BRC20s became a multi-billion-dollar market practically overnight. Then at the end of that year, Robin Linus introduces BitVM, right? So now we can get rollups, we can get bridging, we can introduce through ZK proofs all kinds of other things. Effectively, we're getting Turing complete capabilities for Bitcoin. So we have a significant, like this one technology, which everyone still underestimates, has produced so much dev creativity and energy that yes, it is now driving us into a world where Bitcoin can do everything and everything will be done on Bitcoin. And that turns Bitcoin from just digital gold into digital gold plus, right? That's BTC. BTC is digital gold, but Bitcoin is the operating system for a decentralized future. Everything that's going to be decentralized, which I think is way more than people realize, is going to be decentralized on Bitcoin.
That is an excellent take. Yeah, I remember I said somewhat often that Taproot is the bleeding edge of Bitcoin right now. And when AI first came out, there was like prompt engineers to try and make the models do as much as you could. And I feel the same way about Bitcoin, which is like we don't just need Bitcoin devs, we need TapScript focused devs to just like get in the weeds and understand this to maximum effect. Given your closeness to people building with TapScript, do you have any idea like how explored is TapScript currently in 2024? Because like script we understand well, but TapScript is 2 years old. So do you have a pulse of like, are we 20% there? Like, any idea?
I don't know. I think I think there's a lot of additional innovation to come. I think that one of the things we're going to see is there's significant advances in the world of cryptography, and that is going to translate into new ways that we can use Taproot. But I think we're already so far ahead of where anyone expected us to be just 4 months ago. I would be, within a year, and probably before the end of this year, we're going to see multiple true rollups of Bitcoin. We're going to see execution environments secured by Bitcoin. We're going to see near trustless ability to move Bitcoin between multiple different layers. And that's going to mean that we get the ability to do scalability like never before. We're going to have functionality and trustless development like never before. The ability to introduce privacy. I mean, today the DOJ announced that they were going after the Samurai wallet devs, right? Honestly, that was a long time coming. It's too centralized. But now those kind of things we'll be able to do at scale in a decentralized fashion, more efficiently, lower cost. And at the same time, we've got this meme, 21 million divided by infinity, right? Sorry, infinity divided by 21 million, right? Which is like all of the value that's going to go into the BTC. But Bitcoin has 8 megabytes of data available every 10 minutes. That's very, very little. Up until now, we've lived in a world with cheap Bitcoin transactions. Until recently, people were like gnashing their teeth and pulling out their hair over the idea of whether or not Bitcoin was going to be able to support itself after the subsidy ends. I think the era of cheap Bitcoin transactions is over, because in addition to infinity over 21 million, we have infinite data, infinity over 8 megabytes. And that is going to make Bitcoin block space the most scarce digital asset in the world.
Makes sense. And you're saying 8 megabytes there. Just to make sure, you mean 4, right? Or am I missing something?
Well, I'm adding in SegWit. But maybe I've confused myself. I haven't slept in a long time, so I'm not going to fight you on the.
It's 1, and then you go up to 4 SegWit, and that's it.
I may be making a fool of myself. If so, that's cool. But I think it's 8. But I may be sleep deprived to the point of dyslexia at this point.
This is gonna be good for engagement, because people will be like, "What the hell is Yago talking about? It's blah blah blah." So we'll be good there. Excellent. No, this is great. And yeah, I want to jump into the roll-up stuff in a second. One other question, though, about Sovryn, because you guys recently-ish announced you're going multi-chain. You're taking part of the product suite over to Bob. And that was a big moment, because Sovryn is one of the biggest DeFi platforms, if not the biggest. Very strong brand. You guys have been around for a while. Only on rootstock for the longest. Now you're going multi-chain. Just tell me about, like, the decision to do that. Like, what went into that, and how do you see kind of like EVM chains and Bob, just kind of like at a high level?
Sovryn as a community has a few missions, right? One of them, sort of one of our slogans is, you shouldn't have to be technical to be free, right? So we want to bring really easy to use DeFi, and it has to be DeFi because we don't want people using FTX and, BlockFi, etc., to lose their money. So we want to bring Bitcoin-based decentralization to everyone. Another thing is we want to move the state of permissionless innovation on Bitcoin forward. And so, we'll talk about the white paper in a bit, but, out of Sovryn, we've seen not just pioneering the space of Bitcoin DeFi and Bitcoin-backed stablecoins, but now also Bitcoin rollups. Sovryn was the first project to start talking about Bitcoin rollups 3 years ago and to start researching it and working on it. But the third thing is the most controversial. The most controversial thing that we're trying to do as a community is we want to expand Bitcoin's audience into the world of crypto, right? So we think that the people who are most ripe for adopting Bitcoin are not people who are total no-coiners, but people who are lost in the mists of Solana, right? Trapped in the fumes of ether, right? And what is really unique about Bob is it's the Bitcoin-focused corner of Ethereum. And so it represents a gateway drug to the wider Bitcoin ecosystem, and that's why we're there.
Yeah, because with all these new L2s coming up, the question of, like, what is a Bitcoin L2 got murky for a second. And part of it is narrative. Like, what is the focus there? What's the team building like? And Alexei and Dom are as strong as they come when it comes to building for Bitcoin. So, yeah, very bullish on Bob. Very curious to see how you guys make the pivot there, which mainnet should be soon. So excited to watch how that rolls out. Excellent. Okay, let's jump into this roll-up and this white paper stuff. There's 3 kind of pieces here. You have Bitcoin OS that you guys have already kind of announced. This is like the umbrella thing, is my understanding. And then you announced BitSNARK and Grail today. And and I don't know enough about how these pieces go together. So maybe you can hold my hand a little bit and tell me like what logically makes the most sense to help the user understand these three pieces and how they interconnect.
All right. So let's say we want to be able to build everything on Bitcoin. Awesome. A lot of people want to do that. But a lot of people, very often the same people, also don't want to give up on Bitcoin's decentralization. And basically from the very beginning, right, Satoshi came and, created Bitcoin, and he looked, and, God created the earth, and he looked upon it, and he said, behold, it is good. And Satoshi looked upon it and said, behold, there's so much to do. And everyone else was like, oh, I just discovered Bitcoin, and I'm here to fix it. And there were so many things, but ultimately it came down to three things, right? We want to be able to achieve greater scale. We want to be able to achieve greater functionality, the ability to build basically anything we want on Bitcoin. And we want to do both of those things without reducing decentralization. This is the trilemma. How do you, because it's like we've got a blanket and we try to pull it to one of these three corners and it just sort of gets, we can't cover the whole thing. And over the last 15 years, it's almost like some parts of the community have actually even given up on the idea that we would ever be able to solve the trilemma. And as a result, as like dealing with their cognitive dissonance, they've started to sort of take the approach that, it doesn't really matter, all of this functionality doesn't matter, scalability doesn't matter, or it can be solved by Lightning Network, and none of which has worked. So, how can we do this? And the answer is, and this is not a new answer, right? People have been discussing this, building in layers or building additional systems based on Bitcoin proof of work since 2009, right? Satoshi was discussing it. And that's why I say, this is a debate that has been raging since forever. But the technology wasn't available to us to secure additional chains and additional execution environments which would provide us with functionality and scale, but have them secured by Bitcoin without impacting Bitcoin's security scalability, right? Without changing the block size, without relying on something as imperfect as merge mining. And so what's changing now, and what we're looking to introduce, is the ability to take a bunch of information, a bunch of transaction data that happens off-chain and prove that it happened off-chain without requiring the Bitcoin miners to know anything about it. Right? And the way we do this is with the zero knowledge proof. And the zero knowledge in this particular case is the zero knowledge of the miners. The first thing that we introduced is BitSNARK. And BitSNARK is inspired by BitVM, and it is an optimized system for taking zero knowledge proofs, in this case snarks, and writing them to Bitcoin in such a way that they can be validated, and thus the transactions that are sort of aggregated into those are proved on Bitcoin. And then what you get is you get these transactions secured by Bitcoin. They become a Bitcoin transaction, so they get the full security of Bitcoin. So now you're getting scalability plus the ability in these off-chain transactions to add any kind of functionality that you want. But in order to do that, you need these execution environments. And these execution environments are called rollups because you take all the information, you roll it up to Bitcoin. And so Bitcoin OS is a system for rollups, and the two key components that we've introduced are BitSNARK, which is the verification and validation and proving system for the SNARK proofs, the ZK proofs, and Grail, which is the bridging system between Bitcoin and the rollups.
Okay, so the big innovation here then is rollups, which is something that
I would say
Taproot, right?
Well, okay, so the technologies are Taproot, which allows us to create BitSNARK transactions, which are transactions that can validate SNARKs or ZK proofs, and then Grail, which is a system for building a bridge using these ZK proofs. The result is rollups, right? And so rollups is where we want to get to. And with rollups, we can basically we'll probably start by recreating a lot of what has already been built elsewhere, right? So you'll have like Ethereum equivalent and Solana equivalent systems being built on Bitcoin. But from there, we'll continue to see a huge amount of innovation, and that's the door that Rollups open. And so when I talk about consolidating, right now we've got a whole bunch of L1s, right? There's no trustless interaction between them. They have their own consensus and security and tokens, etc., etc., etc. And what rollups do is allow us to take all of those execution environments, because that's what they basically are. They're execution environments bolted onto consensus systems and tokens. And basically just take those execution environments and rebundle them into Bitcoin.
Got it. Okay. This will probably be a dumb question, but I'm asking it anyway. Because the way we've typically thought about L2s currently is, as you just said, like there's a bunch of L1s or sidechains. They have their own consensus, and we're trying to figure out how to bridge these things. So, like, I give up I bridge over my Bitcoin in as little trust assumptions as possible. I go do a bunch of fun things in La La Land, and then when I want to, I can come back over the bridge, and no one, ideally, can tell me no. Does that model change here when it comes to using these pieces, or is that still kind of the same mental model? I want to make sure people can grok that.
It's day and night. So I've spent the last years of my life supporting, building, promoting sidechains and developments on sidechain. My view right now is that sidechains are minutes away from becoming obsolete technology. And so the sidechains that currently exist will either have to upgrade themselves to rollups or become obsolete, or they just will become obsolete. And the reason is, what rollups give you is, instead of being Bitcoin's best friend, you are Bitcoin, right? The rollup is secured by Bitcoin in the most direct fashion. The transactions are aggregated and rolled up into a Bitcoin transaction. So they get, Bitcoin level security on main chain. The ability to move funds, and this is BTC, but also runes and ordinals, is now possible in a near trustless setting. And where our goal is, and where we will eventually get to, is effectively trustless movement. And so the reason we call it Bitcoin OS is because what it will feel like to the user, right? And then those users are us in 5 years, is that all of this functionality is built into Bitcoin, but it's all one system. It's not a million different chains. It's a single interoperable composable system.
Got it. I have 1,000 questions, figuring out where to go next. When it comes to, I'm probably going to jump ahead to how it's going to feel to use. Because one of the things that I think made ordinals really pop was that it felt L1. Even though there's another node running, there's an indexer, all this different stuff, you just send L1 transactions. So the work behind the scenes is abstracted away. When it comes to this kind of things, is there like a bridge transaction? Does it feel like L1? What's the user flow feel like here?
I think ultimately it will end up feeling like ordinals. Because with ordinals you need to have a separate wallet and you need a different setup. But over time, more and more wallets are sort of integrating BTC and ordinals and runes. And ultimately what will happen is that BTC and ordinals and runes and rollups will all be integrated into the same wallet. So the wallets are going to do most of the heavy lifting for the users. At the beginning, it's going to feel, I think, probably mostly like using a different chain. It will feel more similar to using a side chain than using Bitcoin. And that's a UX problem. UX problems are hard and they take time to solve, and they are partly hard because they're a coordination problem. So, because each wallet tries to solve the problem in a slightly different way, there's no consensus between wallets. And because each of the systems then needs to cater to all of these different wallets, the whole thing becomes a mess. So one of the best things that we can do is try and build into the framework tools which will reduce the degree to which UI experiences become idiosyncratic. And one very powerful tool that we're working on is UTXO mapping, so that the UTXO, the private public key pair that you have on Bitcoin main chain, will be the same private public key that you use for all of these different systems.
That becomes a powerful interoperability piece where like you can start to bring in runes and ordinals and anything that's on the L1 as far as UTXOs maps and carries over to the rollup.
That's right. And what I would expect is, the fact that we're getting these ordinals, have ordinals, and we have now runes, right? Right now, if you look at runes, they're effectively meme coins, and that's got its place. But with the introduction of rollups, you now get the opportunity to start using them for all kinds of assets. And for me, the most important kind of asset is sort of next-gen equity, right? The ability for a community to have shared equity in some goal that they want to achieve, which may be commercial, maybe it will generate revenue, and then to make decisions on the basis of that, distribute revenue, distribute risks and costs, because that becomes a very, very powerful coordination tool around building a Bitcoin native economy. Now, in the sort of wider crypto world, we talk about this as DeFi and DAOs, and I think at the beginning that's what it looks like. But why on earth? I've had the privilege for the last 3+ years to be part of Sovryn. And Sovryn is a project which has a community which has shared equity in something it's trying to achieve. It generates revenue in the form of BTC. It distributes this revenue in the form of BTC. It's serving the same purpose as a corporation, but it's not a corporation because it's not incorporated anywhere outside of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the only jurisdiction that it exists in. And that's cool. I don't have to deal with lawyers. I don't have to deal with contracts, except for smart contracts. And who wants to deal with dumb contracts, right? So I can live truly off grid, right? I'm not just sort of off the electric grid. I'm off the nation state grid, and that's where I would like everyone who would like to be there, which hopefully eventually will be the majority of people, to get off the nation state grid.
Okay, I want to double click on rollups and verifying, because like I pick up words as I go. Some people say rollups can only scale so far. That's maybe another topic, but like there's a big topic in rollups in Bitcoin that we need an opcode change, which is obviously a contentious thing. We can't even agree on CTV. So when it comes to verifying and not changing Bitcoin, does this need an upgrade? Doesn't sound like it does. So if so, why doesn't it? And like, is there limitations of this implementation versus if we did get an opcode in the future?
So I'm someone who really wants to see. I'm a Bitcoin accelerationist, right? I want to accelerate hyper-Bitcoinization, and I want to accelerate Bitcoin, and that means I want to do lots of things with Bitcoin that a lot of people find offensive because they just want to store their Bitcoin in their UTXO, right? That said, as opposed to a lot of people who are Bitcoin accelerationists, I want to see Bitcoin accelerationism not in order so that we can change Bitcoin, but so that we never need to change Bitcoin. To my mind, what makes Bitcoin special, right? The reason we have Bitcoin and everything else is because Bitcoin is permaware. Everything else, Ethereum, Solana, that's software, right? ASICs are hardware. But there's just one thing which exists in this category, which is neither of those things, which is permaware, which is it's totally soft, right? There's no hardware or component required, but it doesn't change. It's not upgraded every 6 months. It's not a massive code base which nobody understands. It's a law of nature, basically. It's permaware. Now, I think that for Bitcoin to continue to be Bitcoin and everything else, Bitcoin needs to become more like permaware, not less like permaware. And so with BitSNARK, with BitOS, we're deeply focused, and on being able to prove that even now, with what Bitcoin currently exists, without any changes to consensus, we can basically build anything on Bitcoin. And if we were to ever encounter a wall where it would be proven that we can't do this securely, then maybe I could be persuaded to make, to support an additional consensus change to Bitcoin. But my number one criteria for what would persuade me to make a consensus change to Bitcoin is that it needs to take us closer to that being the last change ever rather than further away. Right? If we ever make another change, I want it to be the last change ever.
That's a very, it almost seems, I kind of get what you're saying, but it sounds very paradoxical at the same time. We don't need changes by default. We have all the tools we need if we use them effectively. But if there's something that crosses the chasm, it will unlock X amount of things, then make a change. So I guess the question is what, out of all the things that are being talked about, do you think we need more changes right now, or do you think we're at a good spot?
I don't currently. I think we haven't gotten all the juice that we can out. I would need to see a very compelling reason to introduce a consensus change to Bitcoin. It would need to be, and again, I'm an accelerationist, right? I'm not a maxi. I'm not a purist. I'm an accelerationist. But my end goal, where I'm trying to accelerate to, is the world is built on Bitcoin, and the world is built on Bitcoin because Bitcoin is the one thing that doesn't change.
Got it. Okay. So you're not OpCat then. We have everything we need for the next few years. Don't do it.
I have yet. I'm not even close to being persuaded about OpCat.
Got it. Okay. What else are we missing here? Anything that we haven't covered? I've gone through most of my notes, so anything that the people should know about?
I mean, there are a lot of things I talk about. I think. Look, I would say this, right? So my view on Bitcoin accelerationism is highly controversial, because Bitcoin accelerationism is controversial, and then even within the Bitcoin accelerationist world, my particular stance is controversial. And I think I actually have a lot of controversial views on Bitcoin, because I view Bitcoin probably through a different lens than what is common. Most people think of Bitcoin as primarily as a digital token, as a currency, as money. And I think that's true, but I think that is simply a use case of Bitcoin. I don't think that the biggest innovation that occurred with Bitcoin was the creation of digital money or decentralized digital money. I think it was something more profound, which was the creation of cryptographic property rights, which were secured without recourse to violence. That is, humanity has two periods, right? The period where ultimately your rights were secured by violence, and the period after that. And what Bitcoin did is it ushered in that period where our rights are no longer secured merely by violence. And so that framing changes the way I think about Bitcoin and the world. And so I'll give you a sort of a toy example of one of the controversial views that this leads me to. Right? A lot of people hate tokens. They see them as competition for Bitcoin, whereas I see them as a necessary complement to Bitcoin. And the reason is I don't think you can have an economy based on a single asset. And I think what makes Bitcoin BTC, the reserve currency of the world, is that it has a native economy built around it, which has all kinds of different assets, like the ones that I was talking about, right? Like super equity. And I think that having super equity allows communities to come together and to collaborate. And I think it allows people to have equity in the things that they're doing in a way which isn't mediated by governments or third parties. I think all of these things are amazing civilizational changing things that we don't talk about nearly enough in Bitcoin. And as a result, frequently, I think with Bitcoin, we're missing the forest for the trees, right? I think the way to think about Bitcoin is it's basically another planet with its own economic system, and we need to build everything. And it's and what this planet does, right? It's sort of like because that's where Bitcoin is, right? It's not on Earth. It's sort of like in the clouds. It's got its own set of rules, its own community, its own jurisdiction. It enforces those rules by itself without recourse to violence. Amazing stuff. And we need to build a society, an economy. Economy comes first for that world. Otherwise, I think we haven't even begun to explore the true value of Bitcoin.
Totally agree. Yeah, because I've heard you talk quite a few times about building a circular Bitcoin economy, that was what's so fascinating about the anti-ordinals people, is because that was actually one of the bigger circular economies that we've seen now. It's in digital assets, and you can say it's scams or shitcoins or whatever, but it's all in BTC. Like, the gravity is coming to the asset and the network.
I want to point out something around this. There's different views on where value comes from, right? And for people who know their history, they know that economists sort of went through a whole process of trying to decide where value came from. Where does value come from? The use of something? Does value come from how expensive it was to make something? Does value come from supply and demand, right? Each of these, right? So you've got utility value, you've got marginal value, you've got production value. And the reason it's so ambiguous where value for a thing comes from is because it's actually ambiguous, right? Value is ultimately a subjective thing. Now, people who have a utility view tend to be rationalists, right? Tend to be modernists, tend to have a mechanistic view of the world, right? Tend to be into Austrian economics. They have, of these different things, they sort of settled on utility value, right? And so they look at something like ordinals and they say there's no utility there. It's not real. It's a scam. It's nonsense. It's spam. And you know what? They're right. From a utility perspective, all of this meme coin, crypto, blah, 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 it's nonsense. The question is, what are we building and for whom, right? If you believe in freedom, if you believe in sovereignty, then you are making a huge sacrifice. And the sacrifice that you're making is you're basically saying, I'm going to support, not just allow, but I'm going to support other people's right to do stupid shit. Right? That is the basis of a free society. Because the vast majority of what people do is dumb shit. Right? People have crap opinions, which they copy from other people, and they have stupid look, we're a bunch of monkeys running around with cell phones, right? Buying NFTs. We're morons. As a species, we're morons. And we're pushed forward by the rare monkey who isn't an actual moron, right? And what freedom does is it gives the rare, unusual monkey who isn't an actual moron the ability to change the world without getting stoned to death. So what are NFTs and ordinals and all of these? They are expressions of the fact that we have created an environment, or are seeking to create an environment, where the rare intelligent monkey can do his work, right? And that is not a beautiful idea. It's an ugly, horrible, terrible, sacrificial idea, but it's reality.
I have nothing to add there. That was beautifully said. Two last questions. One, the obligatory when. So you dropped all this stuff. White paper dropped 3 hours ago. It'll be in the description for people. But what's the rough ETA for seeing these things and being able to play with them?
We are pretty close to having a devnet, which doesn't have nearly all the features that we want, but we expect to. So follow the space. Follow BTC_OS on Twitter, or go to bitcoinos.build. And follow us there. because stuff's dropping. And by the end of this year, we expect everything will have dropped. There's gonna be a mic drop, and the mic drop, is basically all right, everyone, pack up your bags. Ethereum was a testnet. Solana was a slightly less good testnet, but time to come back to the mothership.
Yep. Bitcoin is gravity. It all comes back to Bitcoin. Okay. Last question. I want to get your take on this. It's going to be a left turn. But you're mentioning this like permaware idea. Bitcoin is forever. And there's a topic right now about miner centralization again. It was the current thing is about like payouts and mining pools. How do you view, because this is such a difficult social coordination issue, and there's economics involved and incentives, how do you view the miner centralization issue as it stands?
It's a complicated topic, but I'm not really concerned right now. The worst thing about proof of work is that it has industrial footprint, so you can find out where it is, and significant returns to scale so that you actually do bring large mining centers, right? The one advantage that I will hand to proof of stake is that it's more invisible, more sort of hard to locate where it's happening. That said, in practice, we still haven't seen mining centralization actually become a problem. And that's because the big advantage that proof of work has over proof of stake is that miners are our bitch. Being a miner sucks. You're basically a feudal slave working in the field. You get to eat only what you produce, and you live day to day. And that makes the fact that it's such a cutthroat, competitive environment where you're constantly burning capital, right, in order to make some marginal profit, means that true centralization or managing to corner that market is not possible. Highly competitive markets are decentralized by nature. So unless something changes there, I don't see right now any indication for worry.
Excellent. Well, this has been a fantastic breakdown of some new cool shit you guys are working on. Any closing thoughts before we bring this to a close?
As early as you think you are to Bitcoin, you're even earlier than that. The Bitcoin economy hasn't even started getting built. And I think that's where sort of the next big narrative is going to come from. The next big excitement is going to come from. The next big growth spurt for Bitcoin is going to come from. We're just getting started. Our foot isn't even out the door yet.
I love it. Love it. Yeah, it is interesting when I talk to normies. They have so much unit bias is definitely an issue. They think they want to get into some other bullshit tokens because they can buy more whole tokens, and I'm like, that's not the way to think about it. But everyone's on.
Well, what did I say? Monkeys. We are monkeys.
Exactly.
100%. I want 6. I want 6, not
yeah. Yeah, I have a sliver. I have one piece of pepperoni on the pizza. This is not enough to sustain me. I can't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, well said. All right. Yago, thanks again, as always, for coming on. Always a good chat. Everybody, I'll have links below to all the stuff we talked about. But until next time.
All right. Thanks, man.
Thank you for listening this far into the episode. If you found it enjoyable, please do like, subscribe on whatever platform that you're listening on. YouTube does me a huge favor to like and subscribe. Find me on Twitter at Jake Blockchain. Show me some love. I reply to every DM. And if you are a Bitcoin builder that is kind of at the forefront of building new use cases, whether it's L1, Lightning, Stacks, Rootstock, Rollups, Ordinals, BRC20, I want to talk to you. So when I'm not doing this podcast, I am the sourcing partner at the Bitcoin Frontier Fund, where we invest in Bitcoin startups at the earliest stages, give you access to whatever you need, whether it's legal, product, fundraising help, as well as capital. So love to talk to you. You can hit me up. Again, find me on Twitter at Jake Blockchain and shoot me a DM. I'll read everything. Love to talk to you guys. All right, peace.
It's gone up. We playing the long game to the block rock chains with the rocks paid off from the blockchain. Going up high octane, so we up in here like pomade. Making big noise, big money, go play with your kid toys. You funny, I'm counting my Bitcoin. We up and we been gone. It's gone. Planned it out and we did this purposefully. Panning out like the kitchen currently. It's like surgery, way it's earning me a nurse's salary per cryptocurrency. I'm on a vacay drinking coconuts while wearing polka dots. This ain't no hocus pocus, listen up and learn. It's gone up.